I'm going to introduce now Dr. Paul Deane, who's Senior Research Fellow in Clean Energy Futures at the Environmental Research Institute, MaREI, the MaREI Centre in UCC. He has authored and co-authored over 120 technical reports on the future of energy in areas such as electricity markets, European and global power systems, renewable energy integration, and energy access. He was the first author on Ireland's low carbon roadmap in 2015. And Paul provides technical assistance to several electricity modelling projects in Ireland and in Europe. Dr. Deane is an active contributor to European policy thinking on clean energy, and in 2019, he was the Royal Irish Academy Speaker in Computer Science and Engineering. So a lot of expertise there, and I'm looking forward to what Paul has to say, and it's over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much, Kirsten and Stephanie, and thank you all for joining today. We were just talking offline before we went live about what an important day this is for our country, the ability to go out and see people who we haven't seen in ages, to go out and get our hair cut. So thank you all for giving up your time and for listening to us today. And thank you very much, Kirsten and Stephanie, for that fascinating presentation. You know, it's really interesting. The idea of value and the value we put in things is really topical at the moment, you know, and how we react to global events, how we react to national events is very much shaped by the definition of our values, what value we put on things, but also importantly, the boundary that we put around that definition of value. And a narrow lens or a narrow view on a value can often lead to distort outcomes. I've been reading Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, Bank of Canada. He's got a really nice book out at the moment which talks about this idea and talks this idea of the values we have as people, as communities, and the values of markets and the values of commodities. And he gives a really interesting example about what can go wrong when we take a very narrow perspective on value. And he talks to the observation of Amazon, the company, and Amazon, the region. Now, from a market value perspective, the market has judged that Amazon, the company, will be very successful, and we put a high value on that because it will be resilient into the future and it will make a lot of profit. Whereas Amazon, the region, will only ever attain a market value once it is cleared, once it's planted, and once it is transitioned over to farming. And of course, that's really wrong, and that's one of the challenges when you take a really narrow view on values. And what I really like about the work that Stephanie and Kirsten have done is that it expands that role of value from climate action, from narrowly looking at emissions, from narrowly looking at energy, into the wider societal view. And you know, it gives us a new vocabulary, it gives us a new way for talking about climate change. And that's really, really important. And, you know, stepping back and looking at the framework that was presented today, okay, look, it's a little bit dense and a little bit tricky in places, but there's a lovely narrative weaving through all of this. And it fundamentally says that, you know, if you reduce emissions, you can increase healthcare outcomes. If you reduce emissions, you can increase employment. If you reduce emissions, you can increase resilience. And I think that's such an important message to come from this work, you know. And even from a political perspective, you know, you can actually turn that upside down, and you could look at it from another perspective. You know, if you want better homes, better farms, and better businesses, well, then one of the ways we can do that is actually by reducing emissions. And I think that's really important for us as a society, for us, for political representatives, to rethink that series. You know, we're here talking about this Rethink series, and that's a really nice way to expand our view on carbon dioxide. I've been working in CO2 and in research, as Alex said, for many years now, you know, and it's difficult to engage with people when we talk about CO2 because, you know, you don't see the consequences of inaction. We might see it on our TV and we see it happening in countries abroad with the weather and bits and pieces, but the consequences of action are actually sometimes missed. And, you know, what Stephanie and Kirsten have shown is that it's really not just about reducing emissions, it's also about increasing well-being, increasing welfare. It's about our health system. So I really welcome that message. And I think it's very important politically, and it's very important socially. And as Stephanie alluded to, you know, we're heading into a remarkable number of years for climate action here in Ireland. You know, what Ireland is setting out to do, reducing all our greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030, is something that no modern economy has ever deliberately achieved in a peacetime period. It is remarkable. It's going to be really difficult. And I think, you know what, it's important to acknowledge that's going to be difficult, because when we acknowledge it's going to be challenging and there's going to be difficult choices ahead, then we can plan, we can prepare, and we can make good policy for that. You know, and to do something that we have never done before and that nobody has done before, we have to be prepared to talk about things in a different way and try things that have not been tried before. And Kirsten spoke about some of the options and that I presented to Ireland. And it's going to be challenging, and it's challenging for a number of perspectives. Number one, okay, Ireland is really strong in the supply of electricity. That's really good, and that's a story we can share with the world. But on the demand side, it's really challenging. And what amplifies this challenge is that it's such a short period of time that we have to do this. So there's the turnover of stock. It takes time to do these things. The supply chain. So that really amplifies the difficulties and the challenges that lie ahead. And if I'm being honest, and I'm not trying to be smart here, I'm not trying to be mean, I'm not trying to be nasty, but I don't think the penny has dropped politically or socially on how challenging a path that we have ahead. And again, I'm saying this not out of disrespect, but out of concern for what lies ahead, because we have to be able to plan for it. I was listening to the Oireachtas debates last week on the climate bill, and there's a huge level of support and there's a huge level of ambition, and that's really good. But often that level of support and that level of ambition comes with a conditionality that is attached that often makes the end goal unachievable. There's resistance to climate, to carbon taxes. There's resistance to onshore wind farms, offshore wind farms, interconnectors, pylons, challenges to changes in farming. We really have to rethink how we're doing all these things. And as Stephanie mentioned, what's required is a real step change in how we think about things and how we talk about things. And in Ireland, yes, we're very good at talking about ambition. We're very good at talking about being hopeful, but you know what? Being ambitious is not a strategy. Being hopeful is not a strategy. And any credible energy transition strategy needs two things. It needs a clear definition of an emissions reduction trajectory, and also needs a clear and detailed financial pathway. And that's kind of the question mark that's kind of missing from Ireland at the moment. I know people are working on that. But this framework is very timely because it allows us to talk to those things. It allows us to look beyond the cost of emissions reduction and look to the benefits. And just when one of those slides is up there, Stephanie, I quickly scribbled down some of the numbers. I calculated a quick health outcome of almost 240, just under $250 million euros in health benefits alone. For our political leaders, and it's going to take massive political bravery to deliver on this, as well as social interaction. Having those numbers is really important because, again, it's so difficult, isn't it? When you're knocking indoors when it comes to election time, talking about CO2 is very different, but talking about the employment opportunities, talking about the health outcomes, talking about the resilience in our society is something that I think will increase our chance of success and increase the chance of achievability for this. And just in terms of my last point, in terms of the overall achievability itself, Alex, if you had asked me this time last year or even 16 months ago, would we achieve this goal? I would have said no. It's too difficult. The demand side elements, or the turnover is too slow, and the timing is too challenging. But you know what? COVID has kind of changed my perspective on this a little bit and maybe tipped the balance slightly in our favor. Okay, it's still going to be remarkably challenging, but COVID has done a couple of things. It has, first of all, released this massive injection of cash into the global economy. There's a financial stimulus coming from the Green Deal in Europe. There's stuff going on in the States with the Biden administration, in the UK, and there's a lot of learning going on. Now, Ireland has a lot of teaching to give out there in terms of what we've done with renewable electricity. That's very beneficial, but those rising boats internationally, I think, will help all of us get a little bit closer to our goals. But when we step back and actually look at it from a social perspective, the pandemic has been remarkably difficult for many people, but for some of us, it has allowed us kind of simple experiments in simplicity. Look at us all here today. I know we're all jaded from looking at Zoom calls, but none of us had to travel today. We're all at home, family and people around us. It has allowed us to try things that we've never tried before. And that's actually a helpful thing. Now, we need to manage our expectations. None of those things like remote working and reduced travel are going to be silver bullets, but they help us get a little bit closer to our goals. But if we stand back and look at the way the government has managed it, we've never managed a pandemic before. We've tried things that we've never done before. And, okay, we've made mistakes along the way, but, we're getting there. And part of that journey was in my perspective, the incredible communication from Professor Tony Houlihan and his team, NEFID, on clear scientific communication of the risks, of the challenges. We weren't all told that everything's going to be okay. We were told it's going to be challenging and it's going to be trade-offs, and we prepared for that. And one of the things that I really like doing actually is stepping back from kind of the headlines and looking at the data. And if you look at the behavior and attitude surveys that the government release every week around COVID, so they ask 2,000 or 3,000 people their views on COVID every week, and you can see different trends and trajectories emerging. And there's a very interesting question in there. They ask people, what are you most worried about? And why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you making all these sacrifices? The vast majority of people say two things. They say, number one, we're doing it for others. We're doing it for our loved ones. We're doing it for the elderly people in society. We're doing it for vulnerable people who we know. And the second answer is that we're doing it for the healthcare system. There's an awareness that if we don't manage this correctly, the healthcare system will be overwhelmed. And I often like to reflect on that as in a wonderful level of altruism and common sense in Ireland that comes from a situation where things are communicated beyond the value of a virus, but to the wider society. And, you know, even though there's lots of different views and beliefs about how COVID should be managed, our climate action should be managed, but our values as a society are really strong, you know, and those values unite us, and those values bind us, and those values motivate us. And, you know, when we step back and look at those values, you know, it's become clear over the last couple of months how we value a resilient healthcare system, how we all value our mental health, being able to pop outside in a clean environment, the value of fresh air, the value of a natural environment, the value of a resilient economy. All these things are really important. The value of looking after each other. So I think one of the opportunities for us when we're looking at this framework is looking at the things and the benefits and opportunities coming from this framework in terms of those values, and mapping those outcomes onto the values that we've shown so strongly as a society over the last 14 months. And I think that will certainly be a helpful conversation. It will increases our chances of success in this area. It still won't be easy, but it might make things a little bit easier to expand that conversation beyond just emissions to our society, to our values, and our community. So, Alex, I hope people do get a chance to read this report. It's a wonderful piece of work. It's visually beautifully communicated. It's very digestible, and it's very readable. And hopefully we can rethink the way we talk about climate change and rethink the way we act to it. So back to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was terrific, Paul. Thank you so much for that.